Hello friends and welcome to Edupedia World Videos. This is the course Basics of Programming in C language and we are learning about loops. So till now we have covered the major theory portions of various kinds of loops. We have also done nested loops and infinite loops, and we have done the three types of loops like for loop, while loop and do while loop. So in the immediately previous video, what we had done was we had used the loops to store values into a single dimensional array. But now what we will be doing is we will be using loops to store the values into a double dimensional array. So that is a more practical example that we will be learning right now. So first of all, let us take a look at the objective of the program. The objective of this program is to take the roll numbers of 10 students and their marks. So we will be storing both the roll numbers as well as their marks. Whereas in the single dimensional array example, we stored only the roll number of 10 students. Now we will also be storing their marks, and we will be taking these marks along with the roll numbers as the input from user, and finally store the result in a multi-dimensional array. So at the end of the program, after the input is over, we will display the roll numbers a list along with the marks to the user on the console. Okay, so for this, let us take the array in which we have to store the values. So since both the roll number as well as the marks are integers, so we will take an integer array and let us name it as data. Okay, so now since we have to store multiple things, okay, one is the roll numbers and other is the marks, so we should take two dimensions. Okay, now to specify the values in these dimensions, so the outer dimension, or you can say the number of, if you say that the first is the number of rows and second is the number of columns, the number of rows that we have to take should be equal to the number of records as in, so how many students' data that you want to store. So we want to store 10 students data, so that is why this should be equal to number of records, and we should write it as 10. And here should be the fields in the second dimension, should be the fields of the data. So how many fields you want to store? Okay, so first field would be the roll number of the students, obviously. Okay, at the 0th index of the second dimension, we will store the roll number of the students, and apart from it, let us say that we want to store marks of 3 subjects. Okay, so the succeeding 3 fields will be used for storing the marks. So first for the roll number, next 3 for marks, total of 4 fields will be used. Okay, so that is our array, and the declaration is now complete. So what we can do is we can also replace these constants with macros. So as I have always explained, the use of macros, so it is always beneficial to take macros because it helps in a better understanding of your program, readability of your program improves, and moreover, if you want to change the values sometime in future, so you only have to change it in the beginning where the macros are defined. You don't have to search for everywhere where this particular index is used and change the value over there. Okay, so let us take 2 macros. One we will be taking for number of records, hash define, and you can name it as num records. And how many records you want to store? We want to store 10 records. Okay, next will be the num fields. Okay, and how many fields are there that we want to store per record? There are 4 fields. So now you can replace them over here, num records and num fields. Okay, so now our declaration of the array is complete, so we can proceed with the further logic. Okay, now we also need to take 2 counters because this array has 2 dimensions. So For a single dimensional array, we use a single loop to store the data. For multi-dimensional array, we will have to use a nested loop. Okay, nested loop we have also studied. So nested loop is just a loop inside the other loop. Okay, so it will have one outer loop and one inner loop. The outer loop will be used to traverse through the number of records. Okay, number of students. So first student, then second student, then third student. This traversing will be done in the outer loop, and the inner loop will be used to traverse through the fields for one student. So first we will store the roll number, then we will store the other values, these marks for the student in each subject. So this traversing should be done in the second loop or the inner loop, and the outer loop will be used to traverse for students. Okay, so for this we will have to take two loop variables or loop counters. So first will be the record counter. Okay, and the second one would be the field counter. Okay, so now we have taken the two declared the two counter variables for two loops. Now let us start our outer loop, and we will be using a for loop. Okay, so the syntax of the for loop is as usual. First of all, the keyword for, and then within the brackets the first thing that comes is the counter variable, and you have to initialize it. So let us initialize it to 0. So there are now we again should recall one thing, that arrays in C have indexes starting from 0. Okay, so first record is at the 0th index, second record is at the first index, and so on. Okay, so here we are, that's why we are starting our counter from 0. Okay, after that what we will have is we will have to apply a condition. Now we know that record counter can have values from 0 to maximum number of records that are there. So we have to iterate through all the records. The maximum number of records are 10, but we have also taken a macro for that. So we will write num records. Okay, so now see, whenever in future, suppose you want to change the number of records, you want to make your program able to store 15 students' data rather than 10. So what you have to do is you just have to update one single value over here. Just change this 10 to 15, and your program will be ready to store 15 students' data. So otherwise, what you had to do was first change over here, then you have to change over here in the loop, and then you would have to change again in the loop used for printing the data. Okay, so now your work has decreased, so any changing would be easier to do. Okay, so the last thing here would be the increment operator that we will use. So finally our record counter variable will be incremented by 1 after every iteration of the loop. That is done by this operator known as the increment operator, double plus plus. Okay. Now inside the loop we have to begin our second loop, the inner loop for fields. So similarly we can just copy this whole line, because we only need to change the name of the counter. So instead of record counter it would be field counter. Similarly here and here. And here instead of num records it would be num fields. Okay, so now our inner loop is also ready. Now what we have to do is we have to take the input from the user. So first of all we have to inform the user that what input he has to give. So we will use the printf statement, and since the syntax of printf is first printf, then the constant string along with the format specifiers. Okay, so first of all what we have to take the input, we have to ask the user to enter the first thing is the roll number of the student. Okay, and then there will be the marks. So now here we have to place a special check. So when this field counter will have a value of 0, at that time we should print that please enter the roll number of the student. And when the field counter will have a value other than 0, then we will have to print that please enter the marks of the student in subject 1, subject 2, subject 3, or whatever. Okay, so for 0 value of field counter we should print the roll number. So that is how we should program it also. So here we will use an if condition. So we have already learned about the if conditions earlier. So if condition is something that allows you to check a particular condition and perform a task if that condition is true and perform some other task if that condition is false. So that is conditional jumping. Okay, so how it is used is if keyword, then within the brackets you have to write the condition, and here our condition would be if field counter double equal to 0. So in case the field counter is 0, that means we are right now fetching the roll number of the student. Okay, so we will write over here please enter roll number of the student, and we will also write the number of the student. So number we will get from the loop counter of the outer loop, because outer loop is the loop that we are using to iterate through the list of the students or through the records. Okay, so this is what we will use over here, record counter. But we have to remember one thing, that although our indices of the arrays are starting from 0, so our first record will be placed at the 0th index, but the user won't understand this. For a user, the first student should always be numbered as 1. So to make it clearer to the user, we can always add 1 while printing. Okay, so it will be more clear to the user. So here it's done. Okay, so now in the else part, what we have to do is, in the else part we have to use a printf statement again, but here instead of roll number, what we will be printing is, we will be printing please enter the marks of the student percentage d in subject, again percentage d, which would be replaced by the number of the subject. Now number of the subject, since the 0th place is already taken by the roll number and first subject lies at the first index only, so it will come straight away. We don't need to add one over here, field counter. Okay, so now this would work. Now this is a format specifier. Since our variables are of the type integer, the format specifier for integers is %d. So we have placed %d here, and how it works is that whenever the printf statement is read by the compiler, it will substitute the format specifier by the value that lies here. So right now here lies record counter plus 1. So if the value of record counter is 1, suppose, so it will add 1 to it and it will print 2 in place of %d. Similarly, in place of second %d, the second variable given here or second value given here will be substituted. Okay, so now our printing is complete. Okay, so we have printed that okay please enter this or please enter that, and we have placed a colon after that so that the user comes to know okay here I have to enter something. One thing that we have forgotten is to print a new line before these lines, because these lines will be printed within a loop. Okay, so what will happen is if you don't print this new line character, each line will come in a single line without any new line in between. So new line is printed using \n, which is nothing but a escape sequence for new line. Okay, so now we should have the scanf statement to take the input, and scanf statement can be common for both roll number as well as subject marks because the array is the same. Okay, we have to change the index only, so that can be common. But printf was different because we had to print separately that roll number has to be entered and marks have to be entered. Okay, so now we have to apply the scanf logic. So inside the quotation marks will come the format specifier of the type of variable to be input. So the type of variable is integer, obviously, so it will be %d, and the name of the variable would be the array. So our array is data. Okay, inside data now we have to specify the indices. So first index would be for the number of record that we have to enter. The number of the record is given in the record counter variable that we have taken over here for this loop. And in the second index, so would be the field number. Okay, so here it will come the field counter. Okay, done. So our scanf is also now complete. So now we have successfully at least taken the input of the number of students, the records for the number of students. Okay, so this much done. Now we have to display the results to the user. For that, you can copy this for loop as it is, because the same for loop that you used to take the input will be used for displaying the output. It will be the same. Okay, so you have to use the counters in the similar fashion. The only thing that you have to change is the printf statements, and the first thing that we have to print out is the roll number and then the fields. Okay, so what we can do is, instead of having two loops for printing out the numbers, subjects, we can use a single loop also. But in that case you will have to print all the subject marks in a single printf statement. Okay, so how that can be done, let us see. You will just write a printf statement, and inside this printf statement you will write the marks of, or what you can do is you can give the headings at the beginning. Okay, so we can write like this: roll number, then you can specify a tab space after that. Okay, so \t is the escape sequence for tab. Okay, after that we have the subject 1 marks, so you can write sub1, then \t sub2, and again \t sub3. Okay, so this will print our headings. The headings that these headings we have to print only at the beginning, so this should be out of the loop, otherwise it will print as such for every iteration. So at the end we have new line, and at the beginning also we should have a new line. Okay, so after this what we have to do is we have to print the marks of all these students. Okay, so how this will be done is, you will have the printf statement as it is, and then we will have the roll number, so which is an integer, so the format specifier would be %d. Then again we will have a tab space, and after that we will have the marks of the students in subject 1. Similarly %d again, subject 2 and subject 3. So we have added 4 %d format specifiers and 4 tab spaces after each one of them. So first %d would be replaced by the roll number, and the other 3 would be replaced by the marks. So that we can do over here. We know that our array is data, and the record counter will point to the particular number of the student, and to print we have to print the roll number in place of the first %d, and roll number is stored in the index 0. Okay, so now this will print the roll number, and the second thing that we have to print is the marks in subject 1. Okay, marks in subject 1 will be stored at record counter index 1. Similarly, you have to print the marks in subject 2. Okay, so you can put a new line within your program wherever you find that your single line is going beyond the scope of your screen. So because C supports ending the line only through a line terminator, that is semicolon, so it will ignore any other new lines in between. So this will be equally good to write a whole line in a single line, or you can break it in between also. So that hardly makes any difference. Okay. So here it is the marks of subject 2, and at the end we have the mark of subject 3. So we have 4%d format specifiers and 4 variables after that. First is the index 0, which is roll number, and second is the index 1, which is the marks in subject 1, subject 2, subject 3. Okay, so at the end we have to have the semicolon. And let us try now save this program and try to compile it. Okay, so it has given certain error. Okay, so it's nothing but we have just forgotten to place a ampersand over here. So scanf actually expects the pointer instead of the variable name. So it expects the address of the memory where actually the data has to be stored. We have to give it the address of operator along with the variable name. So this will give the memory address of data, record counter, field counter. Okay. So now let us save this program and let us try to build it again. I hope this time it should build with 0 errors and 0 warnings. So let us see. Yes, it has completed the build. Now let us try and execute this program. But one thing that we should do before that is that we have also forgotten a new line at the end. So after the last %d, we should have a new line, okay, instead of a tab space, because after the last subject marks we have to go to the next line. Okay, now let us save it and compile it, and then we'll run it. Okay, so now it should run. Okay, it is asking you for the roll number of student 1. So let us enter the roll number of student 1 as 10. The marks of student 1 in subject 1, let us say 67. Subject 2, let us say 57. And okay, student of roll number of student 2, similarly 3. Okay, so that is the last student. Okay, so now we have entered all the data, and see here we have also been successful in printing all the data in a tabular form. So that is how actually what you have learned right now, that how you can read the data into an array, into a multi-dimensional array, and how you can print the data out of a multi-dimensional array. So you have also learned to access various elements of a multi-dimensional array. Now where this is important is that when you will actually be creating big programs that will require a large amount of data, so you will obviously need to store that large amount of data in your memory, and most of the times you will be using arrays for that. Okay, so there are even advanced data structures in C language, more advanced than arrays, which are structures and unions, but those will be covered up in the scope of the advanced course. In basic course we will limit our knowledge up to the use of arrays, and we have till now covered the loops, and we have learned how to use arrays and fill their values using loops. Okay, so in our forthcoming videos we will be doing some more advanced things apart from arrays and loops.